My name is Vex Mortanus, Senior Archivist of the Galactic Historical Preservation Council, and let me tell you something that will make your tentacles curl with embarrassment. We, all of us, every single so-called advanced civilization in this galaxy, got schooled by a bunch of hairless primates who still argue about pineapple on pizza. Yes, you heard that correctly. The humans. But Vex, I can already hear you saying in that whiny, high-pitched tone that makes my gill slits itch. The humans are barbaric. They fight over resources. They have wars. They eat other sentient beings for pleasure. Oh, really? Well, congratulations on describing literally every species that achieved spaceflight before the year 2387. The difference? The humans figured out something we didn't, and it only took us 300 years of getting our collective posteriors handed to us to admit it. Let me start from the beginning, because this story, this glorious, infuriating, ego-crushing story, needs proper context. It was the year 2387, standard galactic time, when humanity first stumbled into our little corner of the universe. And I do mean stumbled. Their ship, the USS Democracy, yes, they actually named it that, came tumbling out of their first successful faster-than-light jump, looking like it had been through a blender made of scrap metal and bad decisions. Captain Maria Santos was the first human to set foot on Zentari Prime, our capital world. I was there, recording everything for the archives when she walked down that rickety ramp of theirs. She looked around at our towering crystal spires, our floating gardens, our biomechanical transport systems, and do you know what she said? Wow, pretty fancy for a bunch of folks who apparently never heard of a constitution. The audacity! Here we were, the Zentari hegemony, masters of 11-star systems, builders of cities that defied physics, and this pink, soft-skinned creature with hair growing out of her head was criticizing our governmental structure. High Chancellor Korvac, may his memory banks rest in peace, nearly had his neural processors overload on the spot. Constitution, he asked, his voice dripping with that special brand of condescension we Zentari had perfected over millennia. We have the sacred codes of dominion, passed down through 40 generations of rightful rulers. Captain Santos raised one of those peculiar facial hair strips they call eyebrows. Uh-huh. And who decided they were rightful? The previous rightful rulers, of course. And who decided they were rightful? You could see the exact moment Korvac realized where this was going. His purple skin shifted to a rather unflattering shade of green. The previous rightful rulers. Got it. Santos nodded, as if this made perfect sense. So basically you are in charge because the guy before you said you could be in charge, and he was in charge because the guy before him said he could be in charge, going back to some guy who said I'm in charge now and everyone else went along with it. The Chancellor's 4 eyes began blinking in rapid succession, always a bad sign in Zentari physiology. That is how civilized governance works. Human, we have order. We have hierarchy. We have traditions that maintain stability across the centuries. Sure, Santos said, pulling out a small, worn booklet from her jacket. Mind if I show you something? What happened next would go down in galactic history as either the most embarrassing moment in interstellar diplomacy or the most enlightening, depending on your perspective. She opened that little booklet, and I swear by the great void it looked like it had been through several wars and a coffee spill, and began reading. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The silence that followed was so complete, you could have heard a quantum particle shift dimensions. We the people, she repeated, looking up at Korvac. Not we the rightfully designated rulers, or we the genetically superior caste, or we the divine appointees. We the people. Every single citizen gets a say in how they are governed. Now, I should mention something here. We Zentari prided ourselves on our intellectual superiority. We had, after all, achieved interstellar travel while humans were still figuring out how to make fire consistently. We had mastered genetic engineering, quantum mechanics, and interdimensional communication. Surely we could handle one simple philosophical concept from a primitive species. We could not. But, stammered Sub-Chancellor Vixis, her chrome-plated cranial implants practically sparking with confusion, if everyone gets a say, how do you maintain order? How do you prevent chaos? How do you ensure that the most qualified individuals make the important decisions? Santos grinned. It was not a particularly reassuring expression. Well, that's the beautiful part. We don't prevent chaos. We channel it. We organize it. We make it productive. She flipped through her booklet, which I later learned was a pocket-sized copy of something called the United States Constitution, and continued reading. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Chancellor Korvac's primary breathing apparatus began making that wheezing sound that indicated severe distress. You mean your citizens can say whatever they want? About their leaders? About their government? About anything?
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, there are some limits. Can't yell fire in a crowded theater when there isn't one. You can't threaten to hurt people. Stuff like that. But generally speaking, if my president does something stupid, I'm allowed to call him an idiot. In public.
On the record.
I can even vote him out of office if enough other people agree with me. The assembled Zentari leadership looked like they had just been told that gravity was optional and mathematics was a suggestion. But, whispered Chief Science Advisor Talon, his 6 arms gesticulating wildly, what about stability? What about continuity of vision? What about long-term planning? Surely your species must suffer from constant upheaval and policy reversals. Santos shrugged. Sometimes, but here's the thing. When we screw up, we can fix it. When our leaders make bad decisions, we can replace them. When our laws don't work, we can change them. Your system might be stable, but stability isn't worth much if you are stable in the wrong direction. She gestured toward the great viewing window that overlooked the capital city. How long has your current government been in power? The Korvac dynasty has ruled for 237 years, the Chancellor replied proudly. And in all that time, have your people's lives gotten better? Are they happier, more prosperous, more free? The silence that followed was telling, very telling. Finally, Junior Administrator Rex, barely past his first molting, spoke up. What do you mean by more free? Santos looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. Kid, when was the last time you disagreed with a government policy? I would never. That's not what I asked. When was the last time you thought your government was wrong about something? Rex's compound eyes darted nervously around the room. Well, there was the matter of the new taxation rates on imported foods. They seemed excessive. But of course, I'm sure the Chancellor knows best. Why? I beg your pardon? Why are you sure the Chancellor knows best? Has he ever been wrong before? Another long silence. Finally, Korvac himself answered. Governmental leaders do not make mistakes. We are selected for our wisdom and trained in the arts of leadership from birth. Captain Santos laughed. It was not a mocking laugh, but rather the kind of laugh that comes from genuine amusement mixed with disbelief. Oh, buddy, you have got to meet my species' politicians. We have elevated making mistakes to an art form. The difference is, when we elect someone who turns out to be an idiot, we can unelect them. Unelect. The concept seemed to physically pain the Chancellor. Sure, every few years we have these things called elections. Everyone gets to vote for who they want to be in charge. If the current guy is doing a good job, they might vote for him again. If he's doing a terrible job, they boot him out and try someone else. Sub-Chancellor Vixis's voice was barely above a whisper. And this works? Well, we haven't destroyed ourselves yet and we made it to the stars, so I'd say it's working pretty well. Plus, check this out. Santos flipped to another page. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. She looked up at the assembled Zentari leadership. Your government can't just break into your home or go through your private communications without a really good reason and proper authorization from an independent judge. The shocked gasps that followed were audible throughout the chamber. But sputtered Intelligence Director Kovac, how do we maintain security? How do we prevent sedition? How do we monitor potential threats to the state? You don't, Santos said simply. Or rather, you do, but you do it the hard way. You have to actually prove that someone is a threat before you can treat them like one. That sounds inefficient, Korvac managed. Maybe, but it also means that your citizens don't have to live in fear of their own government. They can speak their minds, practice their religions, associate with whoever they want, and generally live their lives without constantly looking over their shoulders. She closed the booklet and slipped it back into her jacket. Look, I'm not saying our system is perfect. We have made plenty of mistakes, and we are still making them. But the difference is, we have built-in mechanisms to correct those mistakes. We have created a system where power is distributed, where leaders are accountable, and where individual rights are protected. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of minds grappling with concepts they had never seriously considered before. Finally, young Rex spoke up again. Captain Santos, may I ask you something? Shoot. When your leaders make decisions that affect your entire species, don't they consult with the wisest individuals? The most educated? The most experienced? Santos nodded. Absolutely. We have advisors, experts, scientists, economists, military strategists, you name it. But here's the key difference. Those experts serve the people, not the other way around. Their job is to provide information and recommendations, but the final decisions are made by elected representatives who answer to the citizens. She paused, seeming to consider her words carefully.
You see, we learned something a long time ago.
No matter how smart or educated or experienced someone is, absolute power corrupts them. Give someone unlimited authority, and eventually they will start making decisions based on what's good for them rather than what's good for everyone else. But surely, insisted Chancellor Korvac, there must be some individuals who are simply better suited to lead than others. Some who are more capable, more intelligent, more deserving? Santos finished. Sure, some people are naturally better leaders than others. That's why we vote for them. But here's the beauty of our system. If they stop being good leaders, if they stop serving the people's interests, if they become corrupt or incompetent, or just plain old and out of touch, the people can choose someone else. She gestured broadly. How long would you remain in power if your people could vote you out tomorrow? The Chancellor's silence was answer enough. It was at that moment that I realized something that would change the course of galactic history. The humans weren't just visiting, they were teaching. And whether we liked it or not, we were learning. The session ended shortly after that with promises of further discussions and cultural exchanges. But as the humans departed back to their ship, I couldn't help but notice the expressions on my colleagues' faces. They looked troubled, thoughtful, like someone had just told them that everything they thought they knew about governance was incomplete at best, and potentially completely wrong at worst. And you know what? They were right to be troubled, because within a decade, the first Zentari Constitutional Convention would be called. Within 2 decades, the hegemony would become the Zentari Republic, and within 3 decades, half the civilizations in the galaxy would be frantically trying to adapt these strange human concepts of democracy, individual rights and limited government to their own societies. The humans didn't conquer us with superior technology or overwhelming military force. They conquered us with an idea, a simple, revolutionary, absolutely terrifying idea that governments exist to serve the people, not the other way around. And the most embarrassing part? It worked. Now you might think that the story ends there with a bunch of enlightened aliens suddenly seeing the error of their authoritarian ways. Oh, how wonderfully naive that would be. No, my friends. The real fun was just beginning. Because while the Zentari leadership was busy having their philosophical crisis, word of the human encounter was spreading through the galaxy like wildfire through a methane processing plant, and let me tell you, the reactions were varied. The Krovanian Empire's response was swift and predictable. Emperor Zorlak the Merciless, may his reign burn in historical infamy, issued what he called the Decree of Cosmic Order. In essence, he declared humans to be a dangerous ideological threat and banned any of his subjects from so much as mentioning the word constitution on pain of neural reconditioning. The Valerian Trade Federation, ever practical, saw this as a business opportunity. Within weeks, they were selling bootleg copies of human political documents throughout the outer colonies. "Get your freedom papers here," became their unofficial slogan. Apparently, Revolution sells surprisingly well when you market it properly. But it was the Nexari Collective that provided the first real test of these human principles. And by test I mean spectacular, explosive, absolutely catastrophic failure of traditional governance. You see, the Nexari had ruled their seven-world empire through something called the Council of the Eternally Wise. These were beings who had undergone genetic modification to live for thousands of years, accumulating knowledge and experience that supposedly made them perfect rulers. They made decisions through what they called consensus of the enlightened, which in practice meant they argued for centuries about every minor policy decision. When news of human constitutional principles reached Nexari space, it started with the youngest generation. And by youngest, I mean individuals who were only 3 or 4 centuries old, practically children by Nexari standards. A young Nexari named Kip Valdros became the first to openly question the Council's authority. He stood up in the Grand Assembly in front of the eternally wise themselves and asked a simple question. Honored ancestors, by what right do you rule? The silence that followed lasted for 3 full rotations of their primary moon. Finally, Council leader Morpheus the Ancient, who had been alive for over 8,000 years, replied with the patience of someone explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly slow child. Young Valdros, we rule because we possess the wisdom of ages. We have seen empires rise and fall. We have witnessed the consequences of countless decisions. We alone have the knowledge necessary to guide our people. It nodded thoughtfully. I understand, honored ancient. But I have another question. When was the last time you walked among our people? When did you last speak with a factory worker, or a farmer, or a merchant? Another long pause. We receive reports. We have advisors who, when? That is, such direct interaction is beneath. So you make decisions for people you haven't spoken to in centuries, based on reports from advisors who also haven't spoken to them about problems you have never personally experienced. And that, my friends, was the moment the Nexari Collective began to crumble. Within months, protests were erupting across all 7 worlds. The youngest generation began organizing something they called the Voice of the Present. They demanded representation in government, term limits for the council, and, wait for it, a constitution that guaranteed individual rights. The eternally wise, faced with the first serious challenge to their authority in millennia, did exactly what you'd expect beings with 8,000 years of accumulated arrogance to do. They declared martial law and sent in the military. That was their second mistake. Their first was underestimating humans. Because guess who had been quietly establishing trade agreements and cultural exchanges throughout Nexari space? That's right, our hairless primate friends with their dangerous books and radical ideas about self-governance. When the Nexari military moved to crush the protests, they found something unprecedented. The rebels were organized. They had communication networks. They had coordinated strategies. They had, in short, learned from human history about something called civil disobedience. The rebels didn't fight back with violence. Instead, they simply stopped. Stopped working. Stopped paying taxes. Stopped following government orders. Every factory, every farm, every transport system across 7 worlds ground to a halt simultaneously. The eternally wise, for all their accumulated wisdom, had never encountered anything like it. They knew how to deal with armed rebellion, with violent uprisings, with traditional challenges to authority, but a coordinated, peaceful refusal to participate in their own oppression, that was new. Emperor Morpheus the Ancient, in a moment of desperation that would become legendary, actually sent a message to Captain Santos, who was still visiting various worlds and spreading her constitutional gospel. Human, the message began, in the most condescending tone imaginable, your ideas have infected our young ones with dangerous notions. Surely you can see that beings of your limited lifespan cannot comprehend the complexities of governing civilizations that span millennia. Captain Santos' response was broadcast across the entire Nexari system. I was fortunate enough to witness it firsthand, having been invited to record these historic exchanges for the archives. Your ancient wisdom, she began, her voice dripping with mock respect, let me ask you something. In your 8,000 years of life, how many times has your government adapted to changing circumstances? How many times have you admitted a mistake and changed course? The old Nexari's silence spoke volumes. Santos continued. See, here's what we humans figured out. Experience is valuable, but so is fresh perspective. Wisdom is important, but so is the ability to admit when you are wrong. Your problem isn't that you are old. Your problem is that you have confused age with infallibility. She leaned forward, and I swear her next words sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Every single one of your subjects has the right to participate in their own governance. Not because they are wise, not because they are perfect, but because they are the ones who have to live with the consequences of your decisions. What happened next became known as the Nexari miracle. The eternally wise, faced with the complete collapse of their authority and the peaceful but implacable resistance of their people, did something that no galactic government had done in recorded history. They surrendered power voluntarily. Not all of it, mind you. They negotiated. They established a transition period. They helped draft the new Nexari constitution, bringing their vast experience to bear in service of the people rather than in dominion over them. Council leader Morpheus himself became the first president of the Nexari Republic, elected by popular vote for a term of, get this, 10 years. 10 years, after 8 millennia of absolute rule. The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a quantum blade. But the real shock came when the results started rolling in. Within 5 years of constitutional government, Nexari productivity increased by 300%, scientific innovation exploded, art and culture flourished. The people, given a voice in their own governance, suddenly had a reason to care about their civilization's success. And the eternally wise? They discovered something wonderful. Being advisors and elder statesmen was actually more fulfilling than being absolute rulers. Who knew? Of course, not every transformation went so smoothly. The Krovanian Empire's response to the spreading constitutional plague was to build bigger prisons and hire more thought police. Emperor Zorlak the Merciless declared that any being found in possession of human political literature would be executed on sight. That lasted exactly 18 months. The thing about ideas, as humans have long understood, is that you can't kill them with force. The harder you try to suppress them, the more attractive they become. Kurovian citizens began smuggling constitutional documents like they were precious artifacts. Underground networks formed. Secret meetings were held in abandoned warehouses and forgotten mining tunnels. The revolution, when it came, was swift and absolute. Emperor Zorlak the Merciless found himself facing not just rebels, but an entire population that had simply decided he was no longer their emperor. His own guards refused to follow orders. His administrators resigned en masse. His military commanders held their own constitutional convention and politely informed him that his services were no longer required. He was given a choice: stand trial for crimes against his people, or accept exile to a nice agricultural world where he could spend his remaining years growing vegetables and thinking about the errors of his ways. He chose the vegetables. Within a decade of first contact with humanity, 17 major galactic civilizations had adopted constitutional governments. Within 2 decades, it was 43. The holdouts were becoming increasingly isolated, their citizens increasingly restless. The Zentari Republic, formerly the Zentari Hegemony, became the first multi-species constitutional democracy when refugees from authoritarian worlds began seeking asylum. The Nexari Republic followed suit, then the Valerian Constitutional Federation, then dozens of others. And through it all, the humans watched with what I can only describe as bemused satisfaction. They didn't conquer us. They didn't impose their system on us. They simply showed us that there was another way and let us figure out the rest for ourselves. Captain Santos, now Ambassador Santos, summed it up beautifully in her final address to the newly formed Galactic Constitutional Congress. We didn't give you democracy, we just reminded you that it was always yours to take. Today, 3 centuries after first contact, every major galactic civilization operates under constitutional government. The principles enshrined in that worn little booklet Captain Santos carried have become the foundation of interstellar law: government by consent of the governed, individual rights, separation of powers, and the radical notion that leaders serve the people, not the other way around. The humans, those uncivilized barbarians who fight over pizza toppings, taught the galaxy the most important lesson in political science: that the best government is one that can be changed by its people without bloodshed. And you know what the most embarrassing part is? They are still arguing about pineapple on pizza. Some things, apparently, are more important than galactic governance. But that's humanity for you. They will revolutionize your entire civilization, and then spend 3 hours debating whether cereal is soup. We called them uncivilized. Now every empire in the galaxy uses their constitution. The joke, as they say, is on us.